Okay, fantastic. So hopefully that's given the same sort of background that we gave earlier in the first session to generate some panel discussion and some questions around harvesting and processing of plant teams. And I'm seeing a few questions coming in already, which is fantastic. Please do keep those coming. And special thanks again to Charlotte, who's uploading links left, right, and centre. So we've already introduced our panel. They've already introduced themselves and their sort of individual backgrounds and businesses. But I think if we can, to kick off this panel discussion, just hear from each of them around specific issues they may have faced or solutions they might have come up with around harvesting and processing. I think it's certainly, as mentioned in the presentation there, it's an area where we didn't seem to be able to generate as many solutions as for drilling and agronomy through our activities in the DIVERSify project. But of course, there is a question there of whether that's a real difference there, or whether really are fewer solutions out there, or perhaps we just didn't find them as easy to come across. And there's if you have a look in the chat, there's a good post that's been put up, I believe, from the Remix project, saying they have actually looked within that project as part of Horizon 2020 funding at using combines to separate within the body of the combine, which is quite interesting. We'll come back to that if we have time. So starting with Andrew Manfield, have you got any sort of general input you can make around challenges you've had around harvesting, specific issues around harvesting?
I would say straight up that this is an area that we've had less practical experience with. There'll be others on the panel who will have much more to contribute in practical terms. My own thoughts are that this is a very challenging area, actually, and it's one of those areas where I think this just becomes the big focus between the structured and the unstructured plant teams. You know, that's where it comes into focus very much, and it's whether it's a low capital extensive solution or a high capital investment structured type solution requiring more specialist machinery, and that'll be one of the big questions. And also the other thing I would just bring into the discussion is, I mean, it tends to be a big focus on combinables, but this is an area where vegetable crops could have a big part to play, because you know, certainly there's a big role potentially for intercropping in vegetable crops for aphid control, particularly where there's big challenges in the industry, but that itself presents challenges for harvesting. And I know I've had this discussion with my own potato harvester operator. He throws his hands up in horror every time I suggest that we're going to put something in between each drill of spuds, as he sees his home rollers blocking up on his potato harvester. So anyway, I'll hand on to others.
Thanks, Andrew. Doug?
Yeah, a few things I've sort of observed with harvesting companion crops. I tried rye and peas this year, but rye is an incredibly hard crop, or spring wheat would probably be the same example, but a hard crop to thresh. So if you've got a big seeded crop like a bean or a pea there, there might be quite a lot of damage to the large seeds. Also, I've tried using a stripper header this year, and I think there's a huge amount that could be done with that, and watch this space there. I think it's a lot quicker, and you could get some of the crop at different levels as well with leaving the straw. You're not putting all the straw through. Also, I've had problems just going forward a bit with separation. I'm very lucky I've got my own rotary cleaner. And I have done for the last 20 years, and I've been basically used it for putting all my own seed through. And it's one of the best pieces of kit I've got on the farm. But that's what made me go down the route of companion cropping, because I've got this rotary cleaner anyway. It's an old Lord Denny one, and it's absolutely a brilliant piece of kit. But growing peas and barley or peas and oats are a slight problem, because with the split peas, last year and the year before, I've had to brought a gravity separator in, and that cost £10 a ton to separate it. And that was 200 tons, a very slow process, an expensive process. And I just don't want to go down that route again. And I'm not willing to buy my own. I don't have as a being reasonably small farmer, I don't have the wherewithal to go and buy a gravity separator or a color coder or whatever it is. So just a few pointers.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Andy.
Firstly, I'd say you don't. I mean, we utilise companion crops as in ones we don't harvest just as much as we do as ones we do harvest. And I would, say that the good starting point is just to do a companion crop which you don't harvest, and then see how it works, and then see what benefits you find. You don't have to overcomplicate it to start with. But we built our own separator from a rotary cleaner, all second-hand stuff, which, like Doug, we used to put all our farm stave seed in, which saves us a lot of money. So it's paid for itself fairly quickly, but it's not 100%. There is issues. There's an art to it. Some years the screen settings might be different to other years depending on the size of the seed. Actually, this year with the peas and the oats, I did manage to separate them very well, actually. By getting the screen settings right, I've managed to get the split peas out of the oats, which was one of my worries on our small trial of peas and oats. I've managed to separate them with the rotary cleaner. And in terms of harvesting, we just use the normal header, and I don't. As long as you planned correctly, and my normal sort of rule of thumb would be set it to the settings for the biggest seed and turn your fan down, and then tweak your fan back up again on your combine until you start throwing the smaller seed out the back. That's how I start. And you can, surprising how much of a concave you can tweak up a bit with the with peas or something to get a bit of better thrash. But again, it's planning what you're going to mix first is key, and probably just do a small area first. Don't go and do hundreds of acres, because like Doug said, rye, probably didn't realize that rye was not really easy to thrash. And we've found sometimes that there's some things that you don't realize are going to be an issue that turn up are an issue. So start small.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Graham, have you got, because I know certainly Trials Equipment UK are sort of famous what they've done with combines in terms of almost tweaking them so that we've got plot combines that we use. And again, I'm quite familiar with from working in the trial sector. Do you think there's anything else that can be done maybe with them to tweak?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've done some intercropping type crops for customers. We also build split combines now, which are, the little plot combines that you used to have coming onto your farm are starting to disappear now. We're now using commercial size combines and splitting them down the center, so we can have two different settings, one on each side of the combine for different crops. That wouldn't help if you're properly intermixing, but I mean, the facility is there that we can split augers inside the machine now, and have two different crops go through the same sieves, but be going in different directions once they've gone through the sieve to separate them and that sort of thing. But that's investing a lot in it. I mean, the personal way I look at it is you set your combine up. Your combine can actually do quite well at separating two different types of crop, or harvesting two crops together, and then cleaning afterwards. You're then not pushing sort of all your eggs in one basket. You've got a machine that specializes in that. You're buying and converting to be able to do it at a later date.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So something we've got, again, some questions that are beginning to come in, and I've got a few that have been sent in previously. I guess one of those is, would processing be of interest, or could it be done post-farm gate? So if you were harvesting whole crop, do you think that's something that would be commercially viable? I assume it's achievable. I guess it's a question of whether it's commercially viable or not. So I guess sending the crop off to another stage of processes before it goes on any further. Yes, Andy?
Personally, I think that's possibly how to scale this up is how it's going to be. Most people, if you send stuff off the farm, is probably going to be sent through a cleaner, especially if it's going into human consumption. So there probably is capacity there already for separation on a larger scale at the end user. It's just, I guess it's just getting a end user to accept it, and whether there needs to be investment in machinery on the end user to make it faster and better. But I think that's probably to get it scaled up faster. It's more the acceptance of the market necessary than farmers spending. I don't see every farmer having a colour sorter, for example. I don't think that's the way forward. I think it's the end market, and there is contracts starting to come out. I know there's a wheat and bean organic contract for growing wheat and beans together. We grow for hodmedods, we grow lentils and oats together, and they're not perfectly clean. The lentils aren't perfectly clean when they leave the farm, but hodmedods put it through a colour sorter anyway, so it doesn't matter so much. I think there's just scope of getting that end market to accept it or understand the benefits of it, to help scale up, so people don't have to spend money on farm machinery.
Excellent, thanks very much. Anybody else got anything on that one, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in this area, we're very close to Camgrain at Cambridge. And there's a lot of farms now that don't actually do any storage of their own grain anyway. They all transport it off to Camgrain. They belong to the sort of group which has the facility to do all the cleaning and that sort of thing. I would have thought you might see more of this sort of thing happening. I mean, we've certainly got some very big farms around here, 1,000, 2,000 hectares, which are not actually storing any grain themselves. It just gets shipped straight off the farm, straight to Camgrain. They clean it and process it, and then it all gets sold on from there.
Okay, fantastic. Anybody else on that one? We've done a good job of answering that one. Yeah.
Can I just
sorry, yes, Doug.
Just on a very different topic before I forget, is on drying the crops. If you're drying a mixture of crops, a lot of questions I get are, do they dry at the same time? Say, for example, oilseed rape, peas and oats, because up in Scotland, basically, we've got to dry the whole bang shoot. But I found in the last 3 years with growing those 3 crops together, they've come out just about perfectly. So I didn't have to re-dry any component of the part. Just not a side issue, and not the question that was asked.
It was one of my other questions, so I'll tick that one off. Thank you, Doug. But I guess that, in a way, that probably relates back to something we've mentioned already. It's sort of getting the right crops together initially can help to overcome some of those barriers. So perhaps barriers to drying can be overcome by the right combinations of those 3 crops that you've mentioned there. We've got a question come in on the chat from Fergal. Does Graham think stripper header will help combinable crops?
It'll help if you can get the heights correct. Again, I don't know what modifications or changes they're making to the stripper header, but if you've got 2 very similar height crops, whether the stripper header would actually help a lot or not. But certainly if you maybe you were doing very high oats or rye or something like that, you would quite easily be able to take the top crop off and then have the second crop coming up through.
Yes, Andy.
Another interesting bit of machine I saw recently, Tim May has bought, is a swather that he sticks on front of his tractor, and it puts your crops into a swath. Obviously, we're in the further south. You might not want to do much swathing in Scotland with your rainfall, but I can see that would help maturity. And he's swathing his spring barley at 28%, and that's on his undersown spring barley. And then you can pick that up, and it's I just have to find a link on YouTube. It's quite an interesting machine. It's like a combine header just on the front of the tractor, and with the loss of glyphosate, etc., possibly in the future, or less desiccants. We haven't got Reglone anymore. I could see possibly swathing being a way of getting around certain issues, but obviously you need to be flexible, and it might not be able to do it every year, because a wet harvest swathing is not necessary for everyone, but it's a certain possibility.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yes, Graham.
I was going to say, in this area we do some we have 1 or 2 doing a bit of grass seed, and I don't know whether it worked with the two types of crops, but they put the grass seed through the combine with it quite an open setting, take one lot of the seed out, and then leave it a couple of weeks, and then pick it up with a pickup header and put it through the machine again and get a second amount of seed out that way. And whether with your two crops, if they're slightly different sort of aging or growing, that you could do that as well, put it through the combine, but not actually thrash it, and then pick it up a second time and put it through the machine a second time.
Fantastic. So, Andrew, just touching on something you said earlier, we've spoken a bit there about what we can potentially do in things like cereals, but you mentioned things like field veg as well, where I know there's some sort of interesting, almost robotic-based type harvesting solutions potentially coming through that I would assume could do by almost sort of precision harvesting operation. Is that something you can expand on?
Yeah, I mean, inevitably in these high value crops which, I mean, are structured by their nature, we're going to see the new technology coming in there first, and also because of pressure of a shortage of labour. There's big changes afoot in the veg industry because they're really facing huge pressures in terms of the economics, in terms of the labour requirement and lack of labour, and in terms of aphid control, particularly with the loss of neonicotinoids. It's a huge challenge, and I have no doubt at all that we're going to see robotics moving in there in a big way in the next 5 years. Now, to what extent that'll overspill into the combinables is really very difficult to call, but the other guys have given some really interesting and good solutions on the combinables front. It'll be interesting to see how it develops, but there's an awful lot happening in terms of visual recognition of problems and plants and so on in the veg sector, which will, should be able to give us big advances in terms of harvesting there, and selective harvesting, which is the key, because it has implications not just for the maturity of particular crops, but obviously selecting between crops that are growing side by side.
Excellent, thanks very much. And Graham, something you mentioned, I must admit I hadn't heard the term split combine previously. I'm wondering if that could be taken almost a step further with a sort of strip combine approach or design in some way, where you could, I guess, just split it more times. Is that something that's at least?
Yeah, it's all possible. I mean, with ours, most of ours are done for the trial side of things. So we're weighing the grain off the end of each plot. So we have to have it 100% clean, and we're not allowed to have any mixing between left and right hand side of the machine. But just being able to split it 4 or 5 times, depending on how many straw walkers there are on a machine, really, you could split it certainly into 3 inside a machine. So yeah.
Excellent, thanks. And yes, it's something, I guess it sort of came across in the talks that when we were thinking about plant teams, one of the things we were sort of working on was, well, what actually constitutes a plant team? If we are, does it have to be fully mixed, or is it still a plant team if things are in strips next to each other? And potentially if there's a way through spatial arrangement to help ease that harvesting barrier, that could be, I think, an interesting one to explore. I think I probably know the answer to this question, but it's a question we asked, a similar sort of question to the one we asked around agronomy and drilling, which is, from your own point of view, and again, I guess this applies to the Andrew, Andy and Doug that are actually growing and working with intercrops and plant teams. When it comes to harvesting and processing, would you say the greatest barrier is it getting the timing right? Is it getting everything right in maturity? Is it sort of the actual harvest? Is it the separation part of it? And do you think that barrier, where that barrier is now, do you think that might change in the future? So I'll go first to Andy for that one.
For me, the harvesting itself, I find fairly easy. It's amazing, a bit of tweaking what combine will do. It is a cleaner. So I don't find the harvesting too difficult. The maturity can be, you really have to know, what your main crop is. For example, we had marifat peas with oats, and this year, due to the drought, the harvest was so early that the oats weren't really ready when we combined the marifats. But the marifats we sell on colour, so we couldn't leave the oats in the field. So that can be an issue. The separation is something that can be solved to a certain degree, but again, for me, it's down to the market, actually getting on board as well. I think that is key. But going back onto the robotics, I think, my hope in 5, 10, 15 years is we won't even be looking at fields that look anything similar to what we're looking at now, because the robotics harvesting technology will completely change the whole landscape. The pressures are there from chemicals and everything else and soil erosion. We're losing chemicals left, right, and centre. We don't have a choice really. And intercropping in its purest form we know delivers a lot of the benefits. It's just the machinery, robotics isn't quite there yet. But when they do catch up, I can see, we'll be looking at. I'm hoping my children look at monocultures as something that's very strange to do, and intercropping will be normal. I hope, but we'll see.
Great, thanks, Andy. Doug, is it similar for you? What's your, again, the thing that keeps you awake at night around harvesting and processing challenges?
I don't think the harvesting is really much of an issue. It's just as long as it requires a bit of thought about when they're going to mature. It would be a real pig. I've had oilseed rape, a small portion of the three-way mix of the oilseed rape, not getting that component of the mix because the pods are still green, but it still delivered I think it was a gross margin of sort of £550 a hectare, so which was reasonable, not brilliant, but in other years I've had a couple of lorry loads of rape to sell, so it's having a bit of flexibility, and there are downsides to it, but I think, as Andy said, it's the resilience attitude part of it. And with the loss of up here, chocolate spot's a big problem with beans, and with the loss of chlorothalonil on the as a means a fungicide, then I think having other crops within and I've seen it. I haven't seen chocolate spot, very little chocolate spot in crops of beans which have been companion cropped. And that's just taking one example, but there are hurdles, there are weed issues sometimes, and but you've got to pick your right field. It's all farmers know their own farms and the weeds that are in certain fields. So I think there's a lot of mileage in it, and it's just in its infancy in the modern day. Okay, it's been going on for hundreds of years, companion cropping, but I think it's in its infancy, and I think there's only one way intercropping is going to go, and I think there is going to be more of it in the future.
Excellent, thank you. Is that something you'd agree with, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose to some extent, tying what Andy and Doug have said together, there is no doubt in my mind that the robotics side will come very quickly. It's essentially doable already, and to some extent, intercropping almost facilitates the move to smaller equipment, because if we have an intercrop or an understory, whatever, even if it's just like growing in a kind of traffic lane every 2 meters or something, it can provide a lot of the benefits in terms of what we've discussed with the benefits of intercrop in terms of pest and disease control, and also because we're then compartmentalizing, structuring the field in, let's say, hypothetically 2 meter beds. We can alternate crops, which again we know is commonly done. All these things facilitate the move towards smaller equipment. The only bit of the puzzle that perhaps at the moment doesn't seem to lend itself to smaller equipment is the harvesting operation, which is essentially a logistics business. Everything else, smaller operations, smaller machines, look the absolute way forward in terms of soil compaction and resilience of machinery, in terms of if you have 5 small machines instead of 1 large one, it's much more resilient, much more flexible. You know, it doesn't, if one breaks down, you only lose 20% of your output, so on and so forth. Harvesting remains a bit of a question on that front as to whether we can develop practical harvesting operations based on small machines, or whether we still are looking at a large contractor-based model, a logistics-centered operation. But equally, if we require centralized, as Graham mentioned about centralized storage, which again there's a pressure towards centralized storage because of the impossibility of investing in good quality storage on farms. It just doesn't make any economic sense. Anybody who's tried to justify a state-of-the-art grain store with drying and separation facilities, it just doesn't add up financially, I don't think, for 90% of growers. So we see this move towards centralized storage, which of course facilitates, as Graham says, centralized specialist separation and so on. The question remained going forward, I would say, and this will be one of the big things that potentially changes over the next 10 years. Do we continue to see the move to large 12-meter combines and so on, contractor model logistics operation essentially, or is there going to be a small machine-based solution that comes forward? That's sort of up for discussion at the moment.
Excellent, thanks very much. And I think that probably ties in quite nicely with a comment we've had from Laurent, again, with reference to the Remix project. And I'd certainly recommend anybody in the audience who's not familiar with that project to have a look, because there's been evidently quite a lot of work done around the harvesting barriers to plant teams within that one. But it's also a point that it links in, I suppose, in terms of if we're starting to move towards possibly contract operations, or we're moving possibly towards combines, harvesting operations that might, or harvesting equipment on farm that might require a bit more tweaking and a bit more potentially knowledge and training to operate successfully, to bring a plant team in well. Do you think is there a gap there in terms of accessing some of that skills training, or do you think that will be solved potentially by harvesting being done increasingly as a contract operation? I guess I'll go straight back to you, Andrew, with that one initially, following on from your previous comment.
Yeah, okay. Just as a general comment on skills in agriculture, huge issue. I mean, obviously, we run a precision farming business. Recruitment of skilled technicians is an issue. Indeed, in the farming business, we have recruitment of skilled operators, for vegetables and so on is always a challenge. There's a lot of attractions to work in agriculture, but always getting people to see that in a very competitive labour market is difficult. I personally think that the economics will drive the combination of the economics, the fundamental economics, and the difficulty of finding labour will drive this move to a contractor model of harvesting. And that is the irrevocable drive of things in commercial agriculture. We see it everywhere. It becomes a point where you can't live off depreciation any longer, and you have to invest in some new equipment. It just becomes compelling, and that is almost always large, sort of 12-meter machines. So at the moment, I do think the logic is that will be the way things will go, unless there's some kind of innovation or some development. One of the major manufacturers comes forward with a small machine-based solution, but I personally find it hard to see what that would be at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. Is that something you'd agree with, Doug? Andy, any further comment on that?
Yes, I agree.
Andy, similar? Yeah.
No, I don't agree, actually. I think with the weather windows we've got nowadays for harvesting, and a farm like us, which is growing 9-10 different crops, I can't rely on a contractor. If my premium is for getting my peas in that day, and I can't wait 2 days for a contractor, I can easily pay for my depreciation, my added value, by not having a combine on the field at the right time. I personally think farms in a climate we're going into will have to be more diversified, possibly smaller, especially around here. The field sizes, the roads really don't lend itself to massive machinery, and the price of these big 12-meter machines are just horrendous. You might as well go and buy 3 houses, and you earn a lot more money. I think the machinery manufacturers have got to get their heads around the money in farming isn't there, and charging 800-900 grand for a massive combine just does not make any sense for the really big ones. And even ones we use are in the 6 figures. I don't know where their machinery appreciation figures have come from, but it hasn't been from increased cereal prices anyway. I think they're the ones that are going to get hurt in the next few years, and I think solutions will come. Smaller solutions will come because those things become too big. We're not in the plains of Kansas. We can't have a harvest team start in Texas and finish in North Dakota. It's just not for me. I don't think that is the way it's going to go. But well, time will tell. Time will tell.
Great. I think the interesting bit there, you mentioned that farms potentially getting smaller. I think that's something that, yeah, I'm quite interested in, whether there's a mixed model where the farms that get bigger adopt a different approach to the farms that are getting potentially small, particularly as we start to have more access to, smaller machinery and automation. I guess it's not necessarily related directly to harvest, but do you think plant team cropping lends itself to both scenarios? Do you think it's something that works both at very large scale, so potentially some of those fields in the US that you can't see the other side of, versus smaller field sizes that we might have here in the UK and other places in Europe? I think, again, quite a general question, but I think quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I think it can work at both scales, but I think most contractors, if you say that I want you to go and come and harvest my intercrop at the moment, they'd run a mile probably. Yeah, I think times are going to change, and I don't think we're going to recognise farming in 5-10 years to what it is now. So the mindset we have now for bigger, we know that there's only so much bigger farms can get, and there's only such a small pool of farmers that you can get to before that just falls apart. I'd rather see young people coming into the industry, opportunities for the more specialized farmers. We can't keep afford to losing farms, and we shouldn't wish, as farmers, to lose farms. And I think intercropping will help in some ways to achieve that.
Yeah, is that something you'd want to add to, Doug or Andrew? Andrew, if I go to you first.
Yeah, I guess I see it. I see the move. I do believe there'll be a move to smaller machines for some of the operations. Certainly I think potentially the establishment and the crop development operations. I think it's highly likely that could be an efficient model. And I know I've spoken to you, Dave, before about what I sort of see as the artisan farmer. There will undoubtedly be a demand for really high quality, specialist grown crops, and when I say high quality, I'm not talking about something that's visually perfect. I mean something that's got a really good sustainability profile and it has great taste and all those kind of things. And that market's undoubtedly expanding. I think technology can really facilitate that, because it gives what I call the artisan grower the ability to look at their crop meter by meter by meter in the same way that our fathers and grandfathers might have done, when farms were much smaller. I think that's all absolutely good and possible, and indeed likely. Somebody doesn't agree anyway.
New panel member.
The only bit where that I just wonder about is the harvesting side of things, because I know from our own situation, we run a 20-year-old combine harvester. I know what I paid for that 20 years ago. I know what it'll cost me to replace it. Every harvester needs a driver. It's just extremely difficult to to see how that's going to pan out, because these artisan farmers I'm talking about, I don't see them getting their main income from the farm, frankly. I think it's quite likely that we're talking about people doing other jobs and then supervising their robots or whatever, you know, in the afternoon, or if you like, just as a part-time job or a hobby, you know, developing schematics for how they're going to grow their crops and so on. I might be totally wrong about this, but just in a really limited pool of skilled labor, that has been the history of agriculture for the past 2,000 years or something, and we see that in other industries, and agriculture is no different to any other industry, rightly or wrongly. So I see the pattern of every other industry being repeated in agriculture, and that's exactly what we see in other manufacturing industries, where we see automation allowing people to produce better quality, more bespoke products. Now, that may not be what we would desire, but this is where I see it going. And like, certainly elements of it are so heavily logistics driven that it becomes an almost compelling case to have a contract to do it at the moment, but I may be wrong.
Excellent, thanks very much, Doug. I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to the discussion there.
Yeah, I think companion crops are one of the, they're not an answer to everything, but I can see, I don't want big tractors on my land. I want I think I could do everything on 1,000 acres with just 140, 150 horsepower tractor, with quite a wide drill, 6-meter drill that doesn't take much pulling, direct drilling, stripping every single cost out of the business and trying to reduce my input costs, because nearly every input you put into a crop is, while it might not be bad for the soil or the environment, it's certainly not good, certainly the synthetic inputs. So I'm wanting at the end of the day to be a closed system, and every farmer is different, but that's the way I'm wanting to go, because I can't afford running these huge variable costs on the farm. Also, the fixed cost, as Andy say, is astronomical now. And I don't know where the fuel issue is going, what we're going to replace diesel with, whether it's electricity or not in the future, but that's another aspect to take into account. And companion crops give a platform to be able to reduce these inputs, expensive inputs. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks very much. Andy, just returning to a point you made earlier about, and I guess it links into a bit to what Andrew's just said, looking at potentially different markets, and we've got changing consumers and a real drive to produce product that goes through a supply chain with a sustainability footprint that can be valued at the end. You touched upon, I think it was Hodmedod's as a potential market for your produce that didn't actually necessarily require you to have a perfectly cleaned product from a plant team. Is that something you can expand on? And do you think those sorts of markets will increase in the future?
But the more the point is that Hodmedod's, when I was speaking to them last week, William Hudson, and in terms of branding, I mean, we were talking about this issue of on farm not being able to get some things. For us, it's lentils perfectly clean, but they will put those lentils. They previously putting the lentils through a cleaner anyway, because some of their farmers have stones, and there could be stones in their packet, so they are processing it anyway. And we were talking about the actual putting on the packets of whatever it is, intercropped with oats and stuff, and then having a link on their website to explain to people what intercropping is and the benefits of it. So I think these markets are starting. People like Hodmedod's doing a fantastic job with British pulses and grains, but it is a niche. I mean, the lentils there's only, I think there's 4 or 5 growers in the country, and I grow 4 to 6 hectares depending on the year, and it's not something that's going to suddenly, we can't compete on the commodity market, but it's finding that niche. But a big field of wheat is, it's more difficult. But for me as a smaller farmer, I've got to find those niches and that added value.
Excellent, thanks very much. We've got a minute or two left, I guess, sort of a bit of a summing up question as we had for the first session. If you, I guess the question is, if you could instantly solve one potential barrier now around harvesting and drilling that you think would then have the biggest impact on allowing more plant teams to be produced, or allowing you to more easily produce or market your own plant teams, what would that one barrier be, do you think? And we'll start with Andrew.
Thanks, Dave. Well, I suppose I think what I would do is, if I could get this is perhaps a bit off the wall, but if I could get a tame plant breeder who would breed for the requirements of intercropping and not breed for the requirements of monoculture, that would, I think, make the biggest difference, because so much of the genetic material we're working with now is dominated by the requirements of monoculture, and we all know, I think, obviously, what the limitations and failings of that monocultural system are. So yeah, give me the services of a good plant breeder.
Excellent answer. Yes, yeah. Doug?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Andrew that it's getting the ripening closer together of, if you're, and especially, and I think I think we don't just have to grow two. The more species we can get into the equation, the better. But that holds up that whole plethora of the problems of separation and handling afterwards.
Andy?
For me, having a harvester that can possibly a robotic harvester that can go through and go through the field and only harvest the species that are ready. So if I had a field of 7-8 different crops which could be planted at different timings, it wouldn't matter. The breeding wouldn't matter, because when it's ready, the robot will go through, pick that, take it to the side of the field, and that would be job done. And that really does open up a whole, the input question. You probably wouldn't need fertilizers, you wouldn't need fungicides, etc., etc. That would be, for me, the ultimate goal would be the robotic harvester. And then it really, like Doug says, the more species you've got in there, the more the benefits. And that was shown, I think, at the Intercropping conference a couple of weeks ago in grassland. They showed that the more species in grassland, the higher the yields were. There's no reason why that shouldn't be the same in intercropping.
Excellent, thanks. And Graham, is that something you can make for us?
Yeah, I think that's what they've got to do. Is I must admit, over the last sort of 6-9 months, with COVID and being stuck at home and all sorts of things, I mean, my guys down in the workshop there, they're coming back to say, oh, did you see this robot that's, I think Fendt had got some small robot units that they developed, or they've got an idea for doing single rows at a time. So you're not buying a seed drill with 30 rows, you're buying maybe 5 or 6 little robot drills that does each individual one. So I think the technology's there. It's finding that it can be made. I think we're going to have to. I mean, obviously we're doing a lot smaller areas like you're looking at. Our combines are only 1.5 meters wide. They're not big combines, they're really small. But we're looking at tool carriers and machines for doing the sowing and everything, which are all electric. We are moving forward in that side of things, and you can't. At the moment, I can't see you buying a 400 horsepower tractor that is electric that you just plug in at night and you run all day without having to do something about it. It's just not going to happen. So I think the smaller side of machinery is going to come along. And it's an ideal opportunity for somebody to come along and say, right, let's invest a bit in this, and we'll start looking at smaller machinery and how we can really push it on.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, I found that enthralling panel discussion there. I guess some of those barriers around harvesting and processing are ones I'm less familiar with as well, so I found it particularly interesting from a personal perspective. And I'd just like to extend a big thanks to everybody, to Andrew, Graham, Doug, and Andy for contributing to two very interesting panel discussion sessions there. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to, again, I've probably gone, I've gone over time again. I have a very bad habit of doing that. I'm going to pass over to Jen and Adrian, who are going to sort of sum up the sessions that we've had so far. And then I think after that, we'll have some very exciting news about a potential prototype sprint activity that's being launched, and also a live poll as well. So I'll pass you over now to Adrian and Jen. Thank you very much.